Thanks for clicking on part 2 of this Ultim8-Max construction video. We can probably consider part 1 the intro, and now is when we start to get into some of the more detailed stuff. When we left off, the cabinet had just been glued together, and we need to get the driver openings created, sand it smooth, then get those huge roundovers created. Here I'm getting the correct center for one side of the passive radiator so I can create the recess with my homemade circle cutting jig. I'm actually going right off the measurements from the cardboard box mock-up that I created in the beginning. That's how I'll make sure that the driver and passive radiators don't interfere with each other once they're mounted. I'm creating a slightly larger opening for the recess than I normally would due to the fact that there will also be the thickness of the leather to contend with. I added maybe 1/8 of an inch or so of extra width to account for this. This is taking too long to slow down. That used to slow down faster, I think. Yeah, that router's been making more and more noise lately. I think it might be time for some new brushes. Since this project uses dual opposed 10-inch passive radiators, it's basically rinse and repeat for the other side. Man, I hope the router holds out. That sounds hideous. Here I'm cutting the openings for the passive radiators. You know, many folks seem to use their circle jig and create the opening that way, but that seems like more work. I just use my jigsaw. Does that make me lazy? Let me know in the comments. Time to tackle the recess for the sub driver. Dust collection. This will take a few extra passes as the Ultim8-Max driver has a rather deep mounting flange. The passive radiators have a very shallow flange. In fact, they are actually meant to be surface mounted. But I actually had a cool little trick I was going to try and pull off with the passive radiators, which I had second thoughts about, so I decided to recess them for that reason. I'll clue you in on that in a bit. Anyway, onward. Alright, drill a through hole. Now I have, this is 3/4 inch material. I have an extra, it feels like 1/2 inch that I glued for some extra meat for the screws to bite into, so I'm going to have to go through that too. This thing, it might be only 8 inches, but dang, it's a big mama. All right, let's see. Hooray, I didn't screw it up. Look how far that surround sticks out. That is just a mean looking little beast. I can't wait to get this thing playing and see what it sounds like. I look happy, don't I? Well, I was, until the next day when I went to sand the box with my brand new belt sander. Yeah, I ended up plugging the cord in while it was switched on somehow. It shot off the table so fast that before I could even blink, it was already in pieces on the concrete floor. Somehow, while picking it up, I ended up pressing the power switch and the locking mechanism all in one motion. Still not sure how I ended up doing that. Well, lesson learned, I guess. So, now, here's some footage of me sanding the box with my second brand new belt sander. This time I purchased a protection plan, you know, just in case. The next step, create the roundovers for the vertical edges. I purchased a special roundover bit just for this project. It's a 1.5 inch roundover bit. And yeah, it's kind of scary looking. That's over 3.5 inches of fast moving and very sharp metal just inches from my hand. So, I followed the advice of a fellow speaker builder, Mr. Bill Fitzmaurice, and removed most of the material on the table saw first. Thanks, Bill. I don't think I would have thought of that. What was left after the time of the table saw was easily handled at my fairly huge custom router table in just a few passes. Yeah, a 3/4 inch roundover doesn't work for everything, know what I mean? I gave the rounded parts a quick sanding to ease the transitions that sometimes occur between the flat portion and the curve. Set the sub in here and drill the driver holes. Now what you don't want to do is just stick it in there and drill the holes however it falls. You want to put some thought into it. This is basically You could have it oriented this way, to where you have one at the top and bottom. You could do it this way, which is sort of my preferred way of doing it. The only thing is, since this has 5 holes, I tend to mount this so this hole is up top. It just sort of looks like, you know, a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. I don't know. So I probably would want to do something like that. So I think that's what I'm going to do in this case. So what I got to do is just carefully measure the center and then make sure that I'm centered. I got an equal gap all the way around. I usually do that by eye. Okay. That's actually good. So I have the driver aligned properly and I have an equal gap around the edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this dead center in the hole and press down until it snaps. Man, it's small, but it's heavy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same procedure for the passive radiator, but I have a decision to make. This is the top. Okay. It's going to be on an angle. Now, do I arrange this so that the passive radiator has its screw hole at the top, 90 degrees from the ground, or do I arrange it so that it's in line with the center of the cabinet? I think I ought to align it so that this is at the top, dead center, even though it's on an angle. That looks a little off. That looks better to me, because when you look at it from the bottom up, you're going to see that. Only when you get to the top do you see the angle. But see, you gotta put thought into it. You gotta think what you're doing before you just start drilling holes willy-nilly. Now I have the angle right of the driver holes in relation to the bottom. Now I just, and again, center in the hole and pop the opening. All right, I'm ready to drill the holes out for the fasteners, but before I know what size drill bit I need to use, I have to know what fastener I'm going to use, because I have to be able to drill the same size hole as the shank on the screw I'm going to use. So now it's time, sort of fun, take a look at the drivers and see what kind of fastener they're calling for. This here, this is heavy. Going to need a fairly decent sized fastener to hold. There are 8, which is good. That helps, but still going to need something pretty beefy to hold it. A standard go-to would be number 6. This is black oxide screw, 6 by 1 inch. And when I put that in there, it's right here. Kind of looks a little lost in there. Doesn't look bad on this because this is a larger flange. It's flat. Looks okay on that. Let me try. I've got these. These are cap head screws. They're a little more interesting looking. That might look decent with something like this because there's a large C-shaped opening there where the surround is cut out to make way for a screw. See what that looks like in there. I like that a lot. That looks pretty good. Let me put a couple in there and just sort of see what that looks like. It snugs up against the rubber, which is the extension of the surround, and the actual metal flange itself. That looks actually pretty good. I like that a lot. Usually I try to have the same fasteners on, say, the drivers as the passive radiators. If not the exact same, at least looking the same. Can I get that in there? That doesn't look bad, but even though this is smaller, this is a beefier looking frame. Of course, it is going to be flush mounted. This kind of looks like it sticks out a little bit too much for me. Just a little too big for the size of the flange. Kind of takes over. You try number 8. Yeah, I kind of like that. I kind of like just a standard number 8 screw. I think that'll work fine. I think I might use these cap head screws though for this woofer, and I might use these number 8s for the actual passive radiator. I'm going to draw them out. Shouldn't be too hard. Shove it in there. Oops, it's upside down. I want to make sure it's perpendicular to something. All right. So now we'll just do the same thing. I did all of them. Yep. So I already know I'm going to use number 6 screws for that. All right. Looking at the completed subwoofer, you can see that there's a small gap between the actual cabinet and the maple topper. That gap is created with a piece of 1/8 inch HDF, or high density fiberboard, and it's there for 2 reasons. First, it creates a corner on the top that you can push a cutting tool into to cut the leather cleanly. You'll see what I mean when we get to that part. Secondly, since the leather will tend to bunch up at the corners, having this transition piece will allow the wood topper to sit flat on that piece and not directly on the leather, which, as I said, will be slightly uneven due to wrinkles and bunching. This will create a professional, clean look. I use one on the bottom as well, but mostly just to create a surface to trim the leather against. Testing out this process here. This is the leather I'm going to use. This is a groove. It's maybe 3/16 deep. I might go 1/4 inch deep. It's a 1/16 of an inch kerf. I made this with my new Hercules Harbor Freight Tools 4.5 inch cordless circular saw. So what I'm going to do is I am going to run a groove here and here. I got to do it slightly offset because there's a center screw hole to mount the amp, so I'll go 1/2 inch one way or the other. Once I get the felt glued down and then the leather as well, I will do this with it, shove it in there, and it should stay put. So let me do that now. So this is my mark here. So put that on. Now this doesn't have much of a base, so what you kind of got to do is really be careful, kind of get a feel for where it's at. I got to press against this and make sure that it's flat. Does it sound like I'm complaining? I'm not. All right, that looks good. All right. So, it's actually on a little bit of an angle. I didn't have that set perfectly. Yeah, it is on an angle. Look at that. Anyway, I got this groove cut out and I should be able to essentially do this with it. Tuck it in there. I'm going to use spray adhesive to attach felt to the cabinet to give it a little softness, and also to hide some seams if things expand or contract a little bit. And then on top of that, I'm going to spray the actual leather product, and that should tuck into that just fine. I will ever so slightly just sand the corners of that just a little bit to soften them, just so it won't tear this as I'm putting it in. Who knows how that's going to go. It's only a couple of pieces. That's like maybe 6 inches. That's like maybe 4. So shouldn't be too hard. We'll see. It's time to apply the felt backing to the cabinet. This isn't strictly necessary, but what it will do is give the leather a soft feel when you're handling it. And it will also mask any seam lines that may appear over time in the wood portion of the enclosure. Also, it's kind of hard to describe, but you can also kind of see the padding as the leather wraps around the corners and under drivers. It looks like expertly crafted upholstery rather than just leather glued to a board, if that makes sense. Getting it trimmed out roughly is good enough for this operation. We're using spray adhesive to get it stuck down to the cabinet, and I'll apply a decent amount to make sure that it stays put. I didn't quite land the enclosure on exactly the right spot initially, so I need to cut a little strip to get complete coverage of the felt. And now I'm going to cut the excess off with a razor if I can. It's kind of hard to trim this stuff. It's not traditional felt. It's sort of softer and more fibrous. It's meant for upholstery underlayment, so the razor doesn't cut it super easy, which is why you see me struggling with it a bit. I can't use scissors on it since it's already stuck down, but it's not too bad to trim. Spent the last half hour or so getting everything prepped and ready. I think I'm ready to go. I won't really know until I get in the middle of it and start panicking, and you'll see that on my face, trust me. I'm gonna wear this mask because it'll filter out all the nasties from the spray adhesives. I've got the leather. There's still a few wrinkles in it. I tried giving it a light iron through a cloth, cotton cloth yesterday. Didn't really seem to help, but I know from experience that these creases, they'll kind of even out and fade away over time. I've done this before. Not all around a cabinet like this, but panels in it, and the creases and wrinkles do even out and kind of go away. So I've got this tape sort of stretched. I've got a plan of action. My plan is to spray some of the adhesive on the back of the leather, also on the box on the two faces and the one curve. I'm gonna set the box very carefully. I'm gonna roll it, and then when I get to the point where it needs to be resprayed, then I will spray both the box and the leather, and hopefully, if everything goes right, this thing will be covered with leather in a few minutes. There's probably a few things that I should do that I just don't know. I've sort of gone through it in my head, but I did tape off with the blue painter's tape areas where I don't want all the sticky stuff, driver openings, and the amp here, and I also taped off this section because I'm gonna be laying it down. I want a little bit of overlap. I gave myself a few inches of overlap, and I don't want it to really stick hard to this stuff, because if you try to tear the leather off of this after you put the spray adhesive, chances are it's going to take a lot of the felt with it. The bond between itself isn't very good. If you've got some tape on here to prevent this part that I don't want adhered yet when I start from sticking to the felt, because what's going to happen is if this leather adheres to this felt and I try to take it off and reposition it, it's just going to tear the felt apart. It doesnson have a very good internal bond. It's just sort of going to fluff apart. So now you might ask, why am I even putting felt on first? Why not just put the leather right onto it? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, it's going to have a nicer feel to it when you touch it. It has a little bit of a padding. Picture getting in a car, sitting down, and your arm touches the armrest, the door card, and whatever, the dash, and it's all hard plastic. And then picture sitting in there and it's got some give to it. You know, we know the difference between hard plastic that's like, it's just plastic, and this has some give to it, even if it's just still plastic. But if it feels nicer, then it feels nicer. Perceived luxury, I guess. So I just like the feel of this better than the feel of it right directly on wood. Oh boy. All right, that's not so bad. What I'm trying to do is just press the leather into the felt so that it's sort of remains stuck and taut a little bit. Right now I see some of the wrinkles have sort of been removed, so that's kind of nice. Like I said, they'll diminish over time. I've done this on another project and the wrinkles they went away. This isn't real leather, it's a fabric. It's a fabric with sort of a leather plastic applied, leather vinyl applied to one side. Here goes nothing. Here I'm pushing the end of the leather into the groove that I cut into the enclosure. I'm using black hot glue and a variety of tools such as a body filler applicator and plastic interior auto panel removal tools to get the leather sufficiently inserted into the groove. Yeah, this one came out better. Probably barely noticeable. So that one worked good. All right, so I've got extra. We've got this 1/8 inch high density fiber board to give us something to press this into and then slice it. Again, I think I'm gonna put this on super duper high heat. I'm gluing down the leather to the straight parts first, and then I'll glue down the 4 corners last. They take a little extra fiddling to get right. Now I'm gonna do the corners. Just gonna sort of gather it up, press in. All right, let's see. I gotta work fast. Okay, I think that's enough of that. You get the idea. What do you say we trim all the loose edges of the leather and see about getting this thing wrapped up? Here we go. Let's see what it looks like. Man, that looks good. The driver's dusty. I need to clean that off, but that looks pretty good, I think. Doesn't it? I decided that for the passive radiators, I could just use the pressure of mounting them to hold down the leather. No hot glue needed. But for the driver, I did want to use a bit of hot glue to kind of pre-stretch the leather so I didn't end up overstretching things once I screwed down the driver. How about we take a break from reality and 3D print some stuff? What do you say? I worked these cool outrigger feet in Tinkercad and printed them out in 2 pieces. One is the actual outrigger, the other is the black bumper, which has a 1/2 inch round recess in it. That will accept a rubber pad that will make contact with the actual floor once it's right side up. I used some threaded rod to join the 2 of them together and then screwed the whole thing to the bottom of the cabinet. The paint is kind of a darker gray with a hammered finish on it. This thing is looking good, but it needs a nice top to finish things off. This here is a nice thick maple plank that needs to be thinned a little. Thanks to Dad for the use of his planer, as well as the idea to use a slab of maple in the first place. After actually constructing 2 previous tops, and not really digging what I was seeing, I finally asked Dad for his advice and he suggested a thick maple top stained dark. And that was a good call. After gluing it up, sanding it down, trimming it to size, rounding the corners over on the bandsaw, then on my sander, and putting a 45-degree chamfer on the top to ease the corner, followed by a bit more sanding, and working out a semi-removable method to mount the top using dowel centering pins. I was finally able to put a nice dark finish on the maple. I used Minwax Polyshade, which is stain and poly in one. Unfortunately, as I may have mentioned, this is actually the 3rd top I made for this thing, so I was kind of over filming anything to do with the top at this point. But I did find this footage of an intermediate application of Minwax Wipe On Poly. I finished with a few light coats of Minwax Satin Poly out of the spray can, which gave me the finish that you see here. And that's pretty much it. Well, almost. I had originally intended to create large flat dust caps from balsa wood for the passive radiators and then cover them with the same leather that I used on the cabinet. It would have probably looked a little something like this. But I lost my nerve and I just ended up gluing on some 4-inch replacement dust caps from Parts Express and calling it a day. The stock dust caps work just fine. They just look a little bit too small for my tastes. I like these bigger ones better. It's purely an aesthetic choice, I know, but one that I really wanted to make. So that is finally it. I've been working on this project for over a year. I was beginning to wonder if I'd ever get this thing built, but now that I have, I gotta tell you, this subwoofer project is incredible. It produces more bass than I can almost stand, and the 300 watt Dayton amp is a great match for this thing. Just perfect, really. Well, this part 2 video has been a long one, but I do thank you for sticking with me till the end. And if you think I've earned it, would you please give me a thumbs up or whatever everyone says we're supposed to ask you guys for? I don't even know. Just basically start clicking random buttons on the screen until you hear a happy sound or something like that. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.